God blesses the just and the unjust. Hey everybody, this is Pastor Justin Walker with The Whole Truth. We're going through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and I want you to come along with me. We're in Genesis 36 today, and I'm not going to read the entire chapter to you because I don't want you to get lost or zoned out after what I'm saying. It's a list of names for this guy named Esau. Now, we know who Esau is. That's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob had a twin brother. Okay, Abraham, patriarch of the faith. We know him. Father Abraham had many sons, right? Okay, Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had twin boys, Esau and Jacob. And we've been reading through the story of that. So if you need to go back and watch those videos, go ahead and go back and watch those. Esau, we're now ending the story of Esau, and we're finding out what becomes of this guy named Esau. And read it with me. It's just a little bit of it. In Genesis chapter 36, in verse 1, we see, now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Look in verse 19, and we'll see it again. These were the sons of Esau, who is Edom. Edomites. There's this land that we're going to see throughout the Bible called the Edomites. Later on, Moses will try to go through the land of the Edomites, and they will not, or the land of Edom, and they will not let him pass through. Okay, so Edomites are throughout the scriptures. Well, there's something I want to remind you of. Esau had been crying years before in the scriptures. We remember him crying, saying to his dad, wailing and saying, "Is there no blessing left for me?" Well, Isaac may not have had a physical blessing to give to Esau, but Esau was the grandson of Abraham, and God certainly was going to bless him. Look down with me at verse 6 actually. So this is chapter 36, Genesis 36, verse 6. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, and all his goods, that he had gained in Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. Why did he leave the presence of Jacob? In verse 7, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together in the land where they were strangers, where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. There was too much for Esau and for Jacob, or Israel rather, Israel and Esau to dwell in the same land. So Esau literally had to leave. God certainly did bless him. He blessed him materially. A nation ends up coming from him. That's the Edomites. But there's this other thing about the Edomites that happens. God later on makes a prophecy or says something about the Edomites. Before he makes a prophecy, he actually says something about the Edomites in Deuteronomy. You don't have to turn there, but in Deuteronomy 23 and verse 7, if you want to turn and look, you can see for yourself that God tells Israel that Edom, reminds them, Edom is your brother. Don't despise him. So later, God is telling the Israelite people. So this is how the story's going to go. Israel, the guy, becomes Israel, the nation. Israel, the nation, goes into slavery. Then God delivers them from that Egyptian slavery, and they're making their way into the promised land. And as they're getting into the promised land, Moses is going to talk to the Israelite people. And here's what God tells him to say. Do not despise Edom. He's your brother. That's the same people who try to block Israel from going into the promised land, or at least block them from going through their land to get there. And God says, don't despise them. Remember who they are. They are your brother. So Edom has a special place in the scriptures. Edom has a special place where God has said, don't despise them. But then later on, when we get into the prophets, you get into Jeremiah chapter 49. And what you'll find is this, that God makes a prophecy against Edom. And he warns Edom. How can God, wait a second, how can God do that? How can he say that not to despise them, but then turn around and make a prophecy against them? Well, I would remind you that he does the same for his own people, Israel, doesn't he? He says they're his chosen people, his peculiar people, his special people. They're the chosen nation, and yet God makes prophecies against them. Why? Because God's prophecies, hear this, God's prophecies are not the judgment. They are warning of the judgment that is to come. Did you hear that? God's prophecies is when he's sending his prophets, his mouthpiece, somebody who says, this is what God is saying. You better change, or judgment is coming. That's what Jonah was supposed to do with Nineveh. Remember Jonah and the whale and Nineveh? Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh. Why? Because Jonah knew something. Jonah knew that if he went and warned the people and they turned away from their wicked ways, God would forgive them. That's always the message of the Bible. God will forgive us. He wants us to come back to him, and he's made a way for us to do that. That's why he sent his son Jesus. I can go to the book of the Revelation and show you God has warned the entire world judgment is coming. Why is God warning that judgment is coming? Because he wants us to turn from our wicked ways. God says in one of the prophets, he says in Ezekiel, he says that he takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from their ways, their evil ways, and come back to him. That's what God wants. He wants us to come back to him. That's what he wanted for the Edomite people. Now, remember what I told you in Deuteronomy, as we get to the end of Israel making their way into the promised land, okay? God is saying, don't despise Edom. Can I show you something as we close out today? Can I show you something? Look at chapter 36 in Genesis. And we're reading through, there's this list of names of all the people that are in the land of Edom. And by the way, those names are important. God speaks to us in different ways at different times and reveals things to us. I think those names are important. I'm just not reading them because I don't want us to zone out as we're trying to read this list of crazy names. But I do want you to look as you get into verse 38. So we see that Edom becomes a nation and they have kings. Before Israel ever has kings or ever is a nation, Edom has kings in their nation. And so that happens in verse 31, by the way. Now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Okay. So God kind of fast forwarded in the story, and he's telling us what was happening in Edom. But I want you to see what happens in Genesis chapter 36 and verse 38. When Saul died, Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, reigned in his place. And when Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, died, Hadar reigned in his place, and so on. Baal-Hanan. By the time we get to the end of God telling us the end of Edom, what do we see? Edom is taking kings or setting up kings who have the name of Baal, a false god, mixed into their name. Did you see that? It's not God turning away from Edom. It's not that God hates Edom and hates the Edomites and hates Esau, and so God only chose this one people and nobody else. No. Wait. God chose one people to bring his son Jesus into the world. That's how Israel is the chosen people. God so loved the world, the whole world, that he sent his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. God wanted Edom to come back to him. God says in Deuteronomy, books later, God says of Edom, don't despise Edom. That's what he says to the Israelite people. He says, they're your brother. Don't forget that. God would have saved Edom if Edom would have turned back to God. But instead, Edom was going further and further and further away from God. And Edom ends up setting up kings that have the name Baal in their name. And Baal ends up being a false god in the land of Edom. It's not that God wouldn't have saved them. It's that they didn't ask God to save them because they were too busy worshiping their false god. And that's the same for you and I. God will save us if we'll ask him to, if we'll put our faith in him instead of putting our faith in false gods or false idols or whatever we've trumped up in our lives to be such. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you tomorrow with Genesis chapter 37. See you.